make it better than yesterday. You can always find a way to start over again. When the sun rises, you can start over again. A new day, you can make it better than yesterday.
Hey, what's up, y'all? I've been wanting this lady on the show for a minute, and we finally got some time. I hit her up and was like, "Hey, you got some free time?" And she was like, "Yeah, I do. Come on, let's do it." So I want to introduce y'all to the amazing Stacey Monroe. She is a Latinx trans woman who is a powerhouse here in Texas. She is based in Dallas, and I just wanted to share her with y'all. And welcome to our Play, Stacey.
Thank you for having me, Diamond. I'm so excited to be on. When you texted me and said, "Hey, do you have some time?" I said, "Sure." And then quickly asked, "What's the topic?" And you're like, "You." And I was like, "Oh, okay." That's interesting. Typically, half of the time I talk about, trans policy or advocacy or issues that are going on. So I was just like, okay, this is different, talking about me.
Exactly. So I met you, the very first time I met you wasn't a news like a news conference thing where we were talking about either Malaysia Booker or somebody not when she passed away, but or was it when she had got attacked? Which one was it? I can't remember.
We met briefly when Malaysia Booker was killed, but then in September of 2019, we also you ended up coming out with Monica Roberts. Y'all came out. I remember picking y'all up from the Greyhound. Me and my sister, we went out, picked y'all up, and we went out to the courthouse to tell the DA, hey, like we need y'all to actually like charge this person and not just release him. To this day, he hasn't been caught, by the way. But that's a story for another day. But yeah, that's kind of around the time we met. You came on out. You said, "I'm here to show my support." And from that day, I was just kind of like, "Okay, this is Diamond." And I think that day you imparted some words of wisdom on me, and I was like, "Okay." It's always nice to meet folks who have been in community, and I've kind of followed you for a bit prior to that, and just kind of just seeing your work from a distance, but being able to have that conversation with you about like, hey, like our sisters are being killed, and how to have those conversations with the media and how to like properly organize and advocate, like just the words of wisdom that I got from you and Monica that day was beautiful. So yeah, no, that was our first day meeting. I think
then we did a panel in, well, I don't know what year was that. Was it 2019 or 20? No, it was
2020, right before the
pandemic. Yeah. We was at Creating Change and we did a panel there at was it like a preliminary or something?
It was for the Trans Institute with the Trans Law Center.
Yeah.
Yes, it was me, you, Emmett, and Andrea, Carter. Am I missing anyone?
And Monica. And Monica. Yeah, the late great Monica Roberts. So ever since then, I was like, oh, she's so dope. And you just bring that nuance of just being a Latinx woman and saying, hey, we are Texas and we are Texans and we are part of this fabric too. And us being in coalition. That's what I loved about because there was a time when Texas was the leading, when it comes to trans homicide, Texas was the leading in numbers in the country for many, many years. And it was a mixture of, mainly Black trans women, but Latinx trans women was in that number as well. And so that you were a testament of that coalition just working and thriving in our community. So what I want to know is, how did you grow up? Like who was your family? What did your family unit look like? Who was loving on you and when you was, little pre-transition, whatever, describe your family unit and how that one came about.
So I was actually adopted at 8 months. My mom lost custody, my biological mom, or my incubator, as I like to call her now. So she lost custody of me and was like, basically lost custody of all of her children. So when she lost custody of all her children, my grandmother kept fighting for custody, but we were in foster care for just quite a bit, like going, I think, maybe 8 months or so, because it wasn't until a couple of months later that they were finally able to get custody through the court and get us out of foster care. My sister Natalie, my brother Alex, and myself. Two of my other siblings went with other family members and stuff. But it was interesting because I didn't know until I was a little bit older, when I was maybe like 5 or 6, that my grandmother was actually my mom, and the lady that I always used to see was my biological mom. So I think at such a young age, I didn't know much about that. And then I finally put all the pieces together and I was like, okay. But yeah, I grew
Mm.
up with my grandmother and my step grandfather, and they really just took that mom and dad role and like were there for me really up until, well, grandmother was there for me because they ended up getting divorced in 2003. And so once they divorced, it was kind of just us on our own growing up and really in poverty, honestly, because
Mhm.
we were bouncing around. At one point, me, my sister Natalie, who's also trans, by the way,
Come on, Natalie.
and my brother Alex and my grandmother, we all slept in the 1 bedroom apartment. Um, and we kind of were just getting by, always just kind of making it. And so yeah, that kind of was how I grew up, was with my grandmother. She was always there to provide and keep us afloat. She always made sure we had food and and shelter above our heads. So yeah.
And so how was your experience of growing up? Was it, other than like when you started to kind of, flourish as a kid, and then, that queerness started to kind of peak out and like that, how did that start to manifest?
I was actually very young when I had an inkling. Like I knew I liked boys, but I didn't really quite know like myself, or like the I guess the terminology or the vocabulary, like gender identity, sexuality, none of that. All I knew is I had a physical attraction to boys. And when I was in elementary, and I was like, oh, they're cute, this and that. Um, and I told my cousin, but because I had heard other cousins, like, they all come over to grandma's house, they're all hanging out, playing. And I overheard the guy cousin say, hey, if anyone in our, or like if someone's a fag or this and that, we're gonna beat them up and I'll fuck them up, do this, do that. And so I was like,
Oh,
this I guess that's what that is. Fag means because I like boys. So I was like, no, I'm not gonna tell anyone. I'm gonna keep that to myself. And my cousin was like my best cousin to me, so I was like, I can trust her. And I told her, and she was like, I know. And so we were like little kids, so the fact that she knew, and like she was, I guess, more cognizant or aware, but like she didn't say anything. Like she was just okay, cool. It didn't really phase her at all. And that was around, I think, 6, 7, when I started kind of having those feelings. By the age of 13, I was already out, which was kind of hard because I came out first as gay. And I think a lot of trans people have that experience, where we come out as gay. We,
yeah.
again, don't have that vocabulary, the terminology to properly voice how we feel. So at that point, I really just went in and said, hey, I'm gay. And as I started to try to date, like in high school, I was like noticing like people are like looking for a mask and this and that. And I'm like, what is this? Because I know I definitely am not going to put on like something butch and like go out looking all manly. So I was like, this is not for me. And it wasn't until I saw the interview of Jazz Jennings with Barbara Walters, and I was like on 2020, and it said something about trans, and I was like, transgender. I was like, what is this? And so I started doing all this research on Google, and it was just kind of searching the internet, and then realized I'm like, I think this is how I feel. This is really, and it finally was me being able to give a voice to my like identity in a sense, and I was like, wow. Um, so yeah, that's kind of 13 came out as gay. I think it was like about 16 because it only took like 3 years. I was like, okay, bitch, this is too long. Um, I tried to dress like masculine at times, and it just kind of, I felt very dysphoric. Like it wasn't me. I was like, this just isn't me. And yeah, by 16, I was out. I thought it was gonna be the same. Like I know it was difficult in the beginning with my mom, and I came out at 13 and to family and everything, and like they're like, oh, gay, like what the hell? And I was like 16, trans coming out, but they're used to it. Like they're gonna be okay with it. That was not the case at all.
Oh,
It was
so
a whole cycle.
there was a anytime I hear kind of like these conversations um about like the standards of manhood and being macho in the Latinx community, there is a word that they use. Is it machismo or what?
Chismo.
Yeah, explain that culturally? What is that? Is because it sounds like patriarchy to me, but
Pretty much.
can you give me like some nuance of that?
Yeah, pretty much. So like machismo really is about like upholding like really the patriarchy. Like men are the ones who provide. Men must, like masculine. It has to be very masculine. Anything feminine, like you're automatically considered maricon, a faggot. So they really uphold this on men, and they start that young. Like I see it, like we're almost doing this to children when we're like little kids and almost sexualizing them, like saying, hey, like, is this like, that girl is cute, you're gonna have a girlfriend, like you're gonna do this, like let them have that thought.
Grooming.
Yes, pretty much grooming. And I'm like, so and oftentimes though you see that in a lot in Hispanic culture, in the Latino culture, Latinx culture, is folks uphold this machismo. And so when folks try to talk about gender identity, when we try to talk about sexuality, when we try to talk about anything of feeling our feelings and allowing ourselves to be emotional beings, to express ourselves, then that becomes a problem. And that's when we start getting into a lot of the stigma, a lot of the hatred, and the, I guess when I say hatred, I also mean like lack of education and awareness. And I guess it's also like that internalized stigma of the machismo, because not only is it like the men doing it to the men in the Latino culture, it's also the women. The women are, hey, that's too feminine. You're fag, you're gay, you're maricon, you're this. And it's like, what if they just want to wear pink? What if they just want to have manicured hands? Like, what is wrong with that? And I think that there's this societal expectations or norms of within the Latino culture that we hold people to these specific standards of machismo, particularly anyone who is assigned male at birth. It's this like really trying to almost indoctrinate you into like, you have to like the color blue, you have to dress like a male, you have to present this way. But it's not always the case. I remember growing up, like they always made me want to cut my hair. I said no. I was walking around porcupine, my hair would struggle to grow. I said, it's gonna grow, it's gonna go down. Eventually the weight is gonna bring it down. And so yeah, it's just machismo can be a very toxic thing in our community that for me, like I said, when I heard my cousin saying someone's a fag, we're gonna beat them up. And I was like, that for me was like the start of hiding my identity or even wanting to truly express myself. I knew it and I wanted to tell folks, but when I heard that, that was for me like a no-go from there.
I remember when growing up, I grew up in Indiana originally, and so the cultural demographic is very different there. So when I was younger, there was only a few categories. So like I knew as I got older, you get all the other nuances of categories, the Brazilian, the Puerto Rican, the the Cuban, all that kind of stuff. But in Indiana in the 80s, it was black, white, Mexican, and Chinese. And that any Mexican was anybody that spoke Spanish, and Chinese was anybody that had the slanted eyes that was spoke. There was no kind of nuance growing up in regards to that. So I remember there was this girl named Luz, Luz, in my third grade, and in high school there was literally only two Asian kids, Lakeview and his sister Trong, and so it wasn't diverse at all in regards to our experience. But when I got older and transitioned, like in my 20s, there was this girl, her name was Destiny, and she was a Latinx trans woman, and she was the only Latinx trans woman in our community that I like remember in Indiana. But what was crazy wild, and I saw this when I went to Tijuana, and I saw this when I went to Guadalajara, but in Indiana, Destiny was the only trans girl who could actually go to the strip club and like the Latinx strip club and be a stripper, and they know she's trans. So there was like this kind of I want to say acceptance, based on her conversation with us. Yes, that patriarchy and that homophobia existed, but there was some kind of nuance that allowed her to be there in that space. And I've seen that in other Latinx spaces where the transness, if you are performing a womanhood like you're supposed to do, it almost like in these black, kind of not black market, that's not the right word, but in these like, you know, underground economies, they can kind of be accepted. Did you have you seen that kind of nuance or
Uh,
no?
I've heard of it in community, and I've seen, I mean, at least with drag performance and with stuff of that nature, like there's this club. This is actually a great example, actually, now that you mentioned that. We go to this place called Maison Maya, which is typically like a lot for the Latino culture, Hispanic culture. They have a lot of Mexican food, Hispanic, Latino culture food, right? And one of the things that they have there is they have drag performers or impersonators who are queer folks who are performing. And there, the folks will, a lot of these men who uphold this patriarchy with their spouses or relatives are in there cheering them on. Woo, and like all
Yeah,
this.
that's an example.
Woo, woo.
Yes.
And I'm like, so you can accept this person on stage who's putting on a performance, who's doing all this, and it's a creative expression. It's them expressing themselves, but you can't accept someone telling you, hey, this is who I am, and just respect it. If you can respect someone who is queer, who is performing, it doesn't change when they're performing, because when they leave, they're still queer. So if you can accept them on stage, why can't you accept them off stage?
Yeah, it was an amazing thing because I would the trans girls in our city, we would never be openly accepted at the black strip club. So it was amazing. It was almost like a pooch for her. You know, like her she could pooch about it because I can go in there and strip and make some, not strip all the way down like, you know, the chicks can
Yeah.
do, but I can dance and make a little bit of money. They wouldn't even let us come in the club. If they know we're trans, they wouldn't even let us come in the club. And so it was a nuance that I was like, that must be something culturally. But yeah.
Yeah.
And then when I went to Guadalajara, it was there was one trans girl in the strip club there. And I was like, oh, wow. I was like, there's always been kind of this nuance that I saw that made it feel like there was a little bit of acceptance, but in a situation, like you said, where, yeah, we can do it in here, but outside, you still can't play that role.
Yeah. And that's when, like, leaving outside, they would go ahead and if they see you in public, they'll start calling you names, start telling you, like, you know, all the like these slurs, homophobia, transphobia. But when they're on stage and they're enjoying their meal and they're with family, it's art, it's creative expression, but only in that form. And I think it's about really like having those conversations. And I think of a lot of my family now compared to, this is me speaking from beginning of transition, right? Like over time and over the years, a lot of family has really come around and they've been like trying their hardest, even with just pronouns with the name. And over years, they've come around and they're very accepting, most folks. And those who aren't, I just kind of, you know, cut them off, set my boundaries because I don't have time for that. And I just kind of move on.
So 13, 14, you said 16, it started to shift. So what's happening in community at this time? Like, how are you introduced the good stuff? How are you introduced to communities? Do you start going to gay clubs? Do you start meeting other trans women? Like, describe that to me. Like, what clubs were popping at the time? Because this was in Dallas. This was in Dallas?
Yes, I believe this was actually, can't remember the exact year. I have to go back and like do the math. But, so I think so if I was 16, I was actually going to Youth First. First, it was all online. I was on Facebook trying to find community, and I couldn't find any people in Dallas. And I was like, maybe I'm just not looking hard enough. I'm not using the right terminology. And I kept looking for community in Dallas, and it wasn't until I found Youth First, which was eventually consumed or bought by the Resource Center. But when they were just Youth First, kind of just there for community, especially for the youth, I came in, and that was when I realized I wasn't the only trans person in Dallas. I was like, what the heck? There's other trans people. Then I was learning non-binary, and I was like, oh my gosh, there's more folks out here. Like, I'm not alone in Dallas. And so just having that there, that I think that honestly was the lifesaver for me, just knowing that I wasn't alone in it and that there was other folks in Dallas, because I like literally showed up and I kept going. I was like, I'm here for Friday family dinner. I'm here for everything. Like, what is it? I wanted to really just kind of dive in and really learn as much as I could. And I was like always that person as a child growing up where I would read a TV manual. So when I went to the Youth First Center, I was like asking everybody questions, learning, interacting in group. And that to me was really the initial support that I had. And as I kept, eventually when I was able to get into clubs, I think I was like one time sneaking in when I was 17, but when I finally got in at 18, that was really community up for me down on the Cedar Springs Strip, just kind of going up and down there, going to Caliente. That was, I was actually introduced by one of my cousins to Caliente, and that was to me like I really felt at home because it was like all this Latino culture and people are just vibing, having a good time. So I was like, okay, this is chill, this is cool. So I really have always enjoyed going down in that, like during that time, that was my area. Going down on Maple and going down to the Cedar Springs Strip.
So this was around, you said you was like 16, and so this is like smack dab in the middle of that kind of culturally in the United States where we're having this kind of trans renaissance happen. Well, who are some of the people that you saw like on TV in regards to representation that were kind of staples in your mind as far as trans representation?
Can't remember her name, but I know the second one. I think actually no, the first one was Laverne Cox from Orange Is the New Black. So I remember seeing her because prior to that I had saw the Jazz Jennings interview, and then as I continued to like do more digging and saw about Jazz Jennings, then I saw Laverne Cox, and then I kept seeing more folks just kind of popping up in the media, and I was just like, oh my gosh. So it was just pretty interesting to just kind of see ourselves portrayed. I feel like they could have done better, but it was still the fact that we existed in that, like it was on Netflix, it was this big thing. So to me, it was just everything.
What about Latino representation?
Latino representation. I don't think I really saw much, or wasn't aware of it at the time.
Oh, gotcha. So I know during this time in my life, you're talking about your teens, just kind of this whole world of queerness is opened up. What about your love life? Because that for me is when, you know, the boys getting a little frisky, love feelings starting to happen, butterflies starting to happen. So, and it's not just a, you know, experimentation. Like, how does, you know, romantic love start to manifest as you grow, as you started to grow up during this time?
Well, interestingly enough, I think I only had like one relationship in high school. Um, and that was kind of like when I figured out like I was trans and going like I was figuring that out still at that point. But after that, it was like pretty much empty for me. Like, yes, of course, the occasional hookups on Grindr and all these other websites. But other than that, there was like no actual love or connection for me. And I think a lot of that had to do with abuse that I was still kind of like going through at the moment, that was going on since like my childhood, that I had been going through. So I kind of like never had that until like 2023 or
Oh,
not 2023.
wow.
No, when I was 23, sorry.
Mhm.
So when I was 23 is kind of when I started feeling or having like even trying to go out and trying to do some dating, because a lot of it prior to that was trauma and abuse. And so I was just trying to then I just started to feel, and I started to like say, okay, now I feel like I can trust someone to let someone in, to let these walls down, and to start having these emotional, romantic relationship with folks, which were hurtful at some point. I ended up having a dating someone, which didn't go too well. Not long after a few weeks, we were done. But other than that, it's been very limited. I've kind of haven't had time to or let myself date because of fear. So I've kind of just this year actually have tried to start putting myself out there, and just kind of take it head on. And I feel like I'm at a point where I'm more healed now. And I feel like dating back then, I feel like I had a lot of awareness and intuition where I knew like, hey, 16, 17, I probably shouldn't be dating. Like if I'm going to do anything, I'm going to fuck around. But I wasn't like ready to settle or find love or do any of that, because I think I was still navigating with that trauma. For me, it was just kind of survival at that point and really just trying to
Gotcha.
get ahead.
Yeah, I remember I went through this stage where I was like, that was like the dream. And it might be because I grew up in church or whatever. But once I got the language, because you described the way you describe it, it was, I came out as a gay boy. And then once I was like, and started to see that there was other options, I was like, oh, yeah, I'm a little different than just being a gay man. The same exactly what you did. That kind of learning the language and kind of realizing, okay, there's some nuance to this, and this is actually what I want to be. I remember my immediately I was like, hey, this is how the life of a woman is supposed to go. Life of a girl, life of a woman is supposed to go. So whatever my ideas of what girls are supposed to do, I immediately switched to want to fit that. And that goes to being, and that's the good stuff and the toxic shit. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So when I got into this, when I got in the scenario, I was like, oh, I'm supposed to be in a love relationship. I'm supposed to want to get married. I'm supposed to want to stay a virgin and have my virginity taken in a way that is special. And that all these things that young teenage girls were experiencing, I was trying to create that life for myself as a I transitioned at 13. So in that mindset, I was trying to get that same experience. And while I was loving and that kind of puppy love happening, I did not realize that, oh baby, yes, because children are so free in their mindset a little bit in high school, when they started to make that cultural shift into the adulthood, when we get past that 13 and get up to 18, 19, they're going to start mimicking the adults, and you're going to realize that you are a trans woman, baby, and it looks very different for you. And so that's how I navigated it in my younger years.
You essentially were already like saying like, okay, if I'm transitioning, I'm becoming a woman, then I'm going to take on this full identity, full on, take it head on and go with it. But I think one thing that a thought that came to my head in that moment was thinking like, I feel like I kind of did the same in a way. Like I had to take it on, not the romantic aspect, of course, because I was still going through all that other stuff. But I feel like that might have perpetuated that internalized, not sure if it's like transphobia or ideals of I had to look a certain way to be trans or to achieve this certain identity, when of course, down the line, I learned that that's not the case. Everyone has their own identity, and we're all, we all make and choose what works for us, whether that's medical, social, or legal transition. But back then I was like, no, you got to do the full thing. You got to go through with gender confirmation surgery, affirmation surgery, like everything. You had, like, to me, it was like you had to do everything. If not, you're not trans, you're not woman enough, you're not this ideals or this, I guess, this societal norms of what I thought we had to be or look like to deserve respect, to deserve to exist or to do anything. And then I realized that wasn't the case. I was holding myself to this super high standard of, for some folks, that might be the case. Some folks may want to go through all the way, some folks may not. And that's when eventually, of course, I learned that, hey, that's not the case for me.
So let's dive deeper into that, because that's real shit. Because I do remember the feeling of, and maybe not verbalizing it, maybe not actually saying it out of my mouth, but having these moments where I would feel, when you get to this level of your womanhood, when you start to be pretty, when you start to be attractive, when you don't have stubble on your face, when you have the long hair, when you have this perfect womanhood, then and only then will you deserve, somebody will come along and choose you and pick you and say, you deserve this love. And while I may not be verbalizing it like that, because I'm connecting it to my worth, if I'm not living up to that standard, it also in turn making me my self-esteem lower and making me feel like I'm not enough and making me feel like I don't deserve love and making me feel like this nigga who is fucking treating me bad or doing me wrong or coming only to see me at 3:00 in the morning. This is why I deserve, because I haven't got to the point where I'm this perfect woman. And so I remember having those feelings as a teenager, and it started to get a little bit different when I became in my 20s, but I do remember having that feeling and having to undo that mindset. And that's not much different from cis women.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why it, like, for me, it took me like, I think this took over like 10 years for me, honestly. Like, I started off as a trans heterosexual. I only wanted men. Like, my sexuality even evolved throughout that too. Eventually learning, like, we keep holding to ourselves to these standards of you have to pass a certain way, and we get into the whole passability politics, which I hate talking about passing, because it's like, again, there's not just one way to be trans. But then it also gets into just really trying to not hold ourselves to all these different standards, whether it was my trans identity or my gender identity, my sexuality. I eventually learned I was pansexual. But that took 10 years. And 10 years ago, I said no, because I kept holding myself to these things. And it was also fear. I never actually verbalized it, but it was this fear of, if I allow myself to be myself, even though I've done it once when I was 13, if I do, and I did it again when I was 16 and I came out, I still got backlash. So if I come out and I start talking more about, like, my gender identity is evolving, my sexuality is evolving from what I thought it was, I felt like, oh, I'm going to get even more backlash, more pushback. So it's almost like this system of don't do it, and like it's this internalized fear of like, don't do it, because if you explore or if you go beyond these norms or societal expectations, then all hell could break loose or whatever. But it was really just an internalized fear for me, I felt like. But I guess in 2 years things have changed. I've learned, I've grown, I've met great individuals who have told me like awesome things, and I just kept learning about sexuality, gender, and understanding. One of the great things that have always stuck with me from Rita Cotterly, which was one of the first people who kind of started to begin to mentor me when I started doing a lot of advocacy, was sexuality is who you go to bed with, and gender identity is who you go to bed as. And so that to me has grown in so many ways, because now I've started to understand that my gender identity is not one specific standard, and nor is my sexuality. There's no right way to be.
Let me ask you this, just to kind of compare and see if you go through the same thing. So when in that same regard, so we're talking about romantic love and, and sexuality, but also think about like the beauty standard. So as a trans woman, a Black trans woman, when you are coming into your womanhood, you have to reconcile with this kind of white standard of beauty and what is considered pretty, straight hair. You can't wear your natural hair. You got to get a perm. You got to, do you go, when you do get your FFS and you getting all these surgeries, do you get your nose job and make your nose smaller? What's all that you kind of making these decisions? What's all these things that you have to do to be feminine? And sometimes people will make these decisions not knowing that it's really rooted in white supremacy and making you look more like a white woman. But and they're blaming it on, oh, I wanted to look more feminine and this is more feminine. How does the Latina community, how do the trans women navigate that kind of white beauty standard? Because, especially here in Texas, I want you to talk about that, because Texas right now, the Latina population, Hispanic population has surpassed white people. And so because of that, there's a certain power in that when it comes to culturally and, that kind of stuff. So how were you navigating the beauty standards? What are some nuances in that? What is the pressure around that for y'all?
Well, like one of the first things you said was the straight hair. So today I'm wearing, like I'm becoming more comfortable with leaving my hair in its natural state, not trying to tame it. I think if I would have not tamed it, my hair would have been more curly, more wavy, and like just kind of leaving it. But I think from when I first started at 16 and my hair got like the moment it grew to my shoulders, I was straightening it, always trying to tame. I'm like, it was just too like really just kind of fluffy. There was so much volume to it, and just kind of like these waves, and almost kind of like it was nice textured hair, and I just kept straightening it because I felt like I had to stick up to or and it was almost like not like people were telling me like, hey, you have to straighten your hair, but it was almost like these societal norms that I
The
wanted to,
images.
yeah, these images that I kept seeing. I'm like, okay, this is how I kind of have to look. These are the beauty standards that I kind of have to uphold to. Um, and then I realized eventually like that wasn't for me. Like I now speaking to you today, like I've started to let that go, and I'm like, don't straighten your hair unless like you really just it's a day where you just want to feel straight hair, like okay, go for it, but let it be your choice and not let it be these beauty standards that society sets for you. Just be yourself. So I try to now move along in that way, but I feel like even then it was also like not wearing too much like anything that would show me to be like Hispanic, Latino culture. Like I tried to really fit into these, get rid of my accent, because I used to have a very heavy accent as well. And folks used to like try to try to have me just be myself. And I, at that point, was like, no, like you have to like try to be better. You have to try to do this. And I didn't realize that I was all these white supremacy like norms that I was trying to uphold, was like trying to fit into this norm of not speaking Spanish, of not wearing clothing that was part of my culture or anything of that nature to identify myself, dumbing down my or fixing my accent and trying not to have that accent, trying to always speak English. Like it was all this like me trying to really fit in. And for a while, I lost my Spanish. I couldn't speak Spanish. I think it was an interview I did with Univision in 2013. I butched the hell out of it.
Oh
Um,
wow.
it was so bad. And now, looking at that, like going back and then seeing how I speak now in Spanish, every day I make it a practice. So if I find folks who speak Spanish, I'm like, we're gonna speak Spanish, bitch. Like, ¿cómo estás? ¿Qué vamos a hacer? What's up? ¿Qué onda? Like, la neta, like, what's up? Like, I'm always just trying to use my Spanish because I don't want to lose it. I noticed that that was a reality that was happening over years. I just, even through school, I kept kind of just trying not to draw so much attention to myself and really just kind of like make myself small, make myself not visible. Um, and now I'm just like, bitch, this is me. You're gonna get full
Yeah.
me. And really trying to unlearn a lot of that that I had kind of ingrained into myself.
So what was your taste of like activism? When did you started to participate in that arena?
Um, I mean, there's multiple forms of activism, right? Some folks show up to city council meetings, school board meetings, protests, organizing rallies, petitions. But for me, initially was kind of just writing online. I had my blog at the time. It was Stacey Monroe, and then it was like, well, my trans life. I changed it up, and that was kind of my outlet. Um, and I would write occasionally here and there, post a few things. And it wasn't until one day I was working, and I came home and I was watching the news with my mom, and I saw that the first day of the school board forum for the Fort Worth ISD bathroom debate had happened. And they're like, one thing I noticed, the reporter said that everybody who spoke was in opposition of the guidelines which were there in place to support trans students, and all the people who went to speak at the forum were against it. Not one person like spoke in support of it. And mind you, this is in Fort Worth. I lived in Irving at the time, and I would get off like at 5. I was at the time I was a clinical allergy specialist, And I'd get off, get out of my lab, and I would go straight to just bring my clothes with me, go straight all the way to Fort Worth, an hour, 30-minute drive sometimes. And sometimes it was longer because I had to go straight home, pick up my sister, who would then go with me, because I think it was like 7 sessions that happened, reforms about the debate. Every day from there, I showed up. After the first day, I noticed no one showed up, and I saw that on the news. I made it my intention to show up on the second day, the third day, the fourth day, the fifth day, all the way until the forms finished. And I said, I'm going to speak. And every day, everything I said was different. And it was adding on to what the feedback I was hearing from the opposition. I'm like, okay, so they want to say that, you know, it's about not that this is going to hurt the scores. I'm like, if anything, that's already hurting the scores of the students' test scores and their education and stuff, because they're not being able to be themselves. So every day, anything that they said, I'm like, bitch, I got a rebuttal for you. I'll be back tomorrow. And I was taking notes, and I said, we have to make sure that we have our voice represented, particularly for their record, for whoever's keeping record of that, just to know that we're showing up. We're not going to let you kind of talk down to us. And I think for me, actually showing up to those things was knowing that all the bullshit I went through in high school, the discrimination in college and into the workplace, like all of that followed me. And that was, to me, when I saw that no one showed up, I said, no, bitch, you're showing up. You're gonna do what you have to do. And from there, that kind of led me into becoming a board member for LGBTQ Saves in Fort Worth. They started inviting me to go to different places and do different things. And that was really, for me, the start of kind of my activism there. And then 2017 came around and my mom passed away. And that was a very hard time for me. And I kind of just stepped away for like 2-3 months. And then I kind of like try to get back into it because I thought that that's what I needed to do to kind of keep going. But it was a lot that kind of transpired during that time. So I eventually realized I needed to take time and really just kind of focus on that healing. And I eventually came back, ended up just kind of helping out. That was kind of the tricky part though. I did in the beginning start off with like, you know, grassroots organizations and doing that. But when I came back from my break of like healing and stuff, I started working with HRC, started working with a lot of these like DPD. I came on as an advisor to Chief Haw at the time. And there was all these other roles that I was doing that I was like, okay, I felt like I was trying to change stuff from within. And I was like, no one's going to do this, or maybe people have tried and they're tired and they lost all hope. Like, let me try to be the person inside who's going to bring that change within HRC, knowing already they have a problematic history, and then DPD as well. So for me, it was like, how can I do this? And eventually I realized it wasn't possible. Like some folks may be able to achieve it, but for me, it wasn't possible. I realized that I was being tokenized, that I was being this person. Like when Malaysia was killed, HRC sent me as their trans person to show up in representation for HRC versus them showing up. They didn't really, other than send flowers when we told them like money is needed, this is needed, community is calling for, you know, we need housing, we need this, or we need whatever the case was. They're like, we don't help with that. And I'm not sure if you were part of the conversation when we invited Alfonso David. They were like really using me for everything. Like just anything they could milk me for, they were milking the heck out of me. They're like, okay, bring all your, you know, all your trans community together, particularly Black and brown trans women, into your office at the time that I had. And so brought them all in, and they were, you know, they said they were going to try to see what their needs were so that they could help, only to be told, oh, we can't help you with funds, we can't help you with this and that, we can only help with like the political aspect. I'm like, then why are you convening a group of Black and brown trans women to take time out of their day, and they're not getting paid to come have this listening session with you, for them to give you feedback about how you quote unquote want to intentionally help? And that's when I really just said, like, you have to kind of get out of this. And that was around 2020 when I made that decision of, I'm stepping back from this, and really was trying to find new trans movement, started helping out there with Shannon Walker, and then met Polka at the library, actually while I was still with HRC. And we had already made that connection. And so when I left HRC, I started also reaching out to Pocahontas, seeing what I could do just for it. Particularly during that time was COVID testing because of the pandemic happening. I was scheduling, finding resources, and really just in any way that I could volunteer, I'm like, just throw it at me, because it felt like all that work I was doing with HRC wasn't getting me anywhere. All the work I was doing
Right.
with D wasn't getting me anywhere. When we called for a meeting, when Daniela Calderon was shot with Chief Hall or DPD, we kept getting pushed off. We kept getting pushed off. And so I noticed that wasn't working. When I went into House of Rebirth, when I went into New Translucent, I started to see the impact on community directly, because people were being housed, people were coming out of it, getting a job, getting stable housing, people were getting their name changes with Shannon. Like, I saw the benefits like straight, like directly, and I was
Directly.
like, oh my gosh, like this is where I need to be. And so since then, that's kind of how it's transitioned. So started off with, just going to school board meetings, and still do to this day. I actually showed up to the one in Sherman not long ago, when they tried to take away the role for a trans youth who auditioned. He got the part, and then afterwards they took the part away. But because we all went up, we showed up in numbers and in community and spoke at the school board meeting, it was overturned, the decision, and it was reversed. So I love, actually, I think that's one of my passions, is speaking at school board meetings, because of the shit that I've been through in schools,
Yeah.
and how hard it was for me, that I was like, you know what? I need to be that voice to hopefully not have to have the youth think about like, hey, I need to now, not only do I need to worry about my safety at school, now I also need to show up and try to advocate for my rights as a student.
Right.
Like, that shouldn't have to fall back on them. And I wish that the person I am now is the adult I had when I was a child in high school, and I had someone defending me and advocating for my rights, but that wasn't the case. And that's why I push so hard for it now, to show up to school board meetings, to let the youth know, like, hey, there's other trans people that exist, and we're going to stand up for you, and we're going to make sure your rights are protected. So,
I
yeah.
remember when I was younger, and what you just said is so powerful, because when I was going through some of my high school in the 90s, it felt so lonely. And I was like, I'm supposed to be worried about school right now. I'm not really supposed to be doing the school shit that I'm doing, and this right here. And I gotta show up to go to court and sue my fucking school. Who wants to be doing that? I'm supposed to be enjoying my fucking senior year. And what really, really, I want to say annoyed me, but it kind of annoyed me too. So when I won, they invited me to this like group, like it was like I think it was called Switchboard or something. I can't remember, but it was this group, and I went there, and it was a bunch of fucking trans and cross dressers and adults. And they were like, and they were being nice, but they were like, oh, they were trying to give me shoes and give me things. And they were congratulating me on my win and telling me, now, mind you, I'm fucking 17, and they're congratulating me on my win and stuff, and saying that they were proud of me. So it was all, the intention was to be nice to me. But I couldn't help but think, like, y'all are grown people. Y'all should have been, I should have, this shouldn't have happened afterwards. Y'all should have let me know I had this support when I was going through the battle, because y'all were keeping quiet. Y'all in the closet. Y'all go back home to your wives. Y'all go back home to your partners. Y'all keep this on the low. But now you invite me to this space that kind of feels like community a little bit, but it is not. It's not enough. Like, I'm out here going to the mall, going to the skating rink, going to the things free, and dealing with the discrimination that comes with being open and free as a young trans kid. And y'all up here in the safety of, and I think it was only one black one. I think it was none but white people, but it to me, it felt like, oh, y'all motherfuckers is fake. Yes, y'all is being nice to me now, but I wish y'all would have been down at the courthouse when I came out. And the news was coming in my face, and motherfuckers was bullying me, and I wish I was there to let me know I had the support, because this feels like fake and performative.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's exactly why I do what I do. Like, now going to school board meetings, like, Gordy is one of my good friends, and I consider them family. They're with Equality Texas. So they're always up to date on like school board meetings and folks reaching out to them. So whenever they tell me, hey, there's a school board meeting going on, I think we were just in Austin for the Equality Texas Gala. The next day I went to the All Out for Gaza for Free Palestine on Sunday. Then the next day came back and went from Austin straight to Sherman, stopped at home, changed. I said, I'm showing up regardless of how tired I am, because I could choose to be tired. I could choose to just say, you know what, I'm going to go home. But showing up like that, just seeing the impact I had on the youth and the connection that we made that day, like Max was just so like moved by the fact that community was there. And when I was speaking, he started crying, and we made contact, and I just started speaking to him, and I let him know, like, I've been where you've been, and it's not easy, but that's why I do what I do today, to stand up for you, to let you know you're not alone in this. Because when I started off, I thought I was alone. I'm like, it felt so scary. I felt like the world, it has billions and billions of people, and I felt like I was the only one, only to learn there is a whole community out there, folks. But I wish that community, when you were going through your situation, would have also showed you that love, especially the elders. And I hope that a lot of elders who are hearing this, watching this, understand, like, hey, we have to stand up for the youth. Like, we really have to protect them and let them just be youth. Let them not have to worry about all this extra shit. Like, we should be doing that for them, because we firsthand have been in their shoes. We know what it's like. And I think that if we can revert to that and kind of pull from that experience and speak from experience and insight and provide that to the folks who are decision makers, who are doing all that, I think that we can show them, like, hey, like, this is not just a phase for these youth. Like, they're gonna grow up to be just like one of who you see here, myself or someone else in the trans community who is an adult. Like, this is not a phase. We all deserve to be treated with respect and given the opportunity to thrive. And if you're doing anti-trans policies like this is not going to happen. You're going to end up pushing them to a dark space where oftentimes a lot of the community ends up trying to attempt suicide. And that's something that is at like high numbers, very high numbers, which shouldn't be the case. But unfortunately it is, because of all the stigma, the harassment, the discrimination, the homophobia, transphobia, everything included all together. It just makes it even harder.
Well, Stacey, I love that I am in community with you. You are somebody that I always think about when I think of, Texas, leaders, trans leaders who are always showing up, even, when we are tired. You are in that number, and I am proud to be a Texan with you. I am proud to be a trans woman with you. I am proud to always, when I come to shit and you're there, I know that I'm in the right spot, and we're doing what we need to do to make that happen. I'm proud of what you just becoming the director of Trans Empowerment Coalition. Yeah, you becoming a director. I'm like, yeah, somebody is seeing her work and giving her a position, and I love to see it. And so, I just want you to know that I am proud of you as, your elder. That I am proud of you.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. And also, like, the great thing is I started off as House of Rebirth also as a volunteer since 2020, and then last year, 2022, I got offered a position to start on as your executive assistant. So it's also, I'm still doing that. So I'm still an executive assistant. I'm still a director. And I think there's a lot of other great opportunities coming that I don't want to jinx. And I'm just gonna hold on to it and hope that things happen. But yeah, and I think that this opportunity actually with tech is giving me a lot of opportunity to build some of the programs that are lacking in community. Like, yes, we have House of Rebirth. Yes, we have New Trans Movement, and we have Trans Pride Initiative and a few other groups in Dallas. But I think that folks are forgetting sex workers. Like, there still comes this shame with it. And for some folks, sex work is survival and sex work is work. And I think that we need to provide a safe space for them. And I think that's something that honestly is in the works right now. We're still trying to get into all of that and making sure that we're also not creating harm by advertising it, putting it together. So we're figuring out all the logistics of all that, but really trying to be intentional and not recreate programs that are already existing in communities. So House of Rebirth right now doesn't have a brick and mortar. They're trying to work on the Rebirth Center. So I told Pocahontas, what do you need? What do you need from the space? Like, we have the space. There's a whole bunch of space. Let me know what you need. I'll block it off on the calendar. You can use it, no charge. You don't even have to slap our logo on it. What does House of Rebirth need? And I think that's part of the name, because we were also thinking about changing the name for Trans Empowerment Coalition before I started, because I'm going to be honest and very transparent with you. It was very white centered, and it wasn't really doing what it's starting to do now. And folks were really just treating it as a friend group. And I'm like, and it's not representative of the community, and it's based out in East Dallas over there in that community. So I'm just like, how are you all white folks traveling from outside of this community coming in and trying to say that you're serving the community, but yet you don't see Black and brown trans people in here? So at that point, I was kind of like, things need to change. But then I realized, well, we don't have to change the name. What we can do is make it more intentional and actually just lend the space out to folks who are already have that programming, and they just need somewhere to host it, because they can't host it in their homes anymore. It's growing and needs to get bigger. It's like, that's how we step up in community and just have that intentional allyship and say, this is what we're going to do to support you. And we don't need to constantly keep recreating and competing for these grants and trying to, everyone's competing for something. And then at the end of the day, it ends up harming our community, because each organization or each group has X amount, but yet they don't have the goal that we need. But imagine if all these organizations could put their resources together and all this, like, we would be able to meet our goal and achieve a lot. So that's why I was like, Poca, what do you need? I told the same to Shannon. She was actually came out and did, prior to me starting, they had just started and did a name and gender marker correction workshop. So they did that. And now just opening it up to different folks to come in. We did also with Kind Clinic recently. We did this harm reduction. We called it Community Care Construction, a harm reduction kit build. And it was in collaboration with the Kind Clinic, but it was during Trans Awareness Week. And we were intentional about, we had a town hall, we had a movie, we had the community care construction for the harm reduction kits. Then we had a self-defense class. We also had a peer-to-peer support group for TGNC folks, and we had a Trans 101, and then finally led into TDOR. And it's a lot of programming that was non-existent prior to me starting, and that we're going to continue to see, obviously, more programming coming that is really serving the community in East Dallas and beyond, but really with an intentional purpose of, how do we help analyze community, what is already in place, don't recreate it, support it, and if it's not there, then create it. But stop recreating and creating all these groups that are just kind of being multiplied and not really achieving the goal.
Right.
Gimme euphoria, more than peace of mind. It's the
So tell me, what has been making you feel in the past week, past month, or in your life? And it could be something small like some cheesecake, it could be a cute wig or some new lipstick, it could be whatever, or something big, whatever you want it to be. What has been bringing you euphoria this week?
This week, what's been going on for like about a year, because I finally in 2018 started HRT after having been in transition for almost 10 years. It was just a social transition. And so I've only been on for a couple of years, and starting to see how like a lot of weight is being distributed to like my hips. And
Come
it's
on,
like giving me that
yada
little
yada yada,
getting a little booty, boobs are getting more perky, and really just feeling myself. And just kind of like the skin glowing, the softness. Like most people back in the day, if you knew me, bitch had rough skin, eczema, was dealing really bad with it. And as I've continued to take care of my skin, I made some improvement, but with that bitch softened me. And so now the other day I had a cousin of mine who like touched me, but like just kind of rubbed up on me and was like, hey, oh my gosh, you're soft. And I'm like, okay, so I thought that was just a thing. But little things like that is what brings me joy, is just being able to be my authentic self, and just living in my truth, honestly.
Ah, I love that. So for me, what has been bringing me joy, I'm reading this new book called The Sum of Us by Heather McGee. And it is about how us coming together help us prosper. And in the book, they give tons of examples of different various communities coming together to make shit work. Like when we talk about unions, when we talk about just different coalitions with racial coalitions, gender coalitions, like just different things. And I'm somebody who feels like because we, people on this side of the aisle, because we have some of the same enemies and some of the same people lobbying against us, when we come together, when we think about reproductive justice, when we think about trans rights and trans health care, when we think about voter suppression laws, most of us who have those as the crux of our problems, and we see that as big issues in our community, the same people are attacking those things. So if we come together, we actually can be more effective than being apart. And so it's that book, reading it and seeing some of the powerful stories that Heather kind of points out, that has been bringing me euphoria, because it's giving me hope that us coming together can really, really be impactful. And so, yes. So thank you for being
that.
Yeah.
Now I'm interested in wanting to like kind of happening right now in Gaza and in Palestine. Like, people forget that it's our collective liberation that we're focused on. And I feel like, you talking about this book, it kind of just ties it in. Like, without us coming together for reproductive justice, coming together for immigration rights, for trans rights, LGBTQ rights, all of it, if we don't come together, we can't be free, because it's just not going to happen. We can't liberate one without the other. We all have to be liberated. And I think that it's important when things are going on, like in Palestine, in the Congo, like all over the world, we need to speak up, because we have to do it in numbers. The more, the better, because that's the only way we're going to let the people in charge know that, hey, we're not going to put up with this shit, and no more. And I think that really just ties it in. So please send me the book, because now I want to know more. I want to definitely read it myself.
I'm texting it to you right now. So tell the people where they can find you.
They can find me on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, or X now, but I don't really use that shit anymore. So follow me on Threads. But yeah, it's all under and then THE Stacey Monroe. So the Stacey Monroe. But yeah, so you can find me on those the social media, Instagram, and I'm learning Discord and all these other things, apparently, which a lot of the younger generations are using. And so I'm just like trying to figure it out, but primarily Instagram, Facebook, and and Threads.
And we will have those links down at the bottom. Thank you for joining me on Marsha's Play. And this has been amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
I make it easy to love me. I make it easy to care for me. I make it easy to share all your world with me.